Hi everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming this to this lecture. And I want to say hello not just to the people here in Chingtan Room, but also the people at home. Welcome. Um, my name is Rowie Azada Palacios, and I am an assistant professor of the Department of Philosophy. And it's really my pleasure and privilege to be kicking off today's session, today's public lecture. The person who will be giving today's public lecture is an old friend, a former colleague, who is now an associate professor of clinical pedagogy at Kyushu University in Japan. His research examines how to transform education using the insights of Japanese philosophy combined with contextual psychology. He is the author of Watsuji Tetsuro's Global Ethics of Emptiness, a contemporary look at a modern Japanese philosopher. And he also translated Sueki, is that correct? Fumihiko's Religion and Ethics at Odds, a Buddhist counterposition. And he's also currently one of the editors of the Journal of Japanese Philosophy. So it is truly my joy and privilege to be introducing Dr. Anton Sevilla-Liu.
Hi everyone. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I hope everyone online can hear me okay. Well, if you can't, if you could let us know. Yeah, okay. So looks like a few people are coming in here too. Hi, welcome. We're just about to get started. Oh, thank you for the thumbs up. So I guess sound is going good. Very nice. I hope you can see my slides. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm here to talk about contextual approaches to clinical pedagogy, philosophy and psychology in education. And that's thank you for the introduction, Ma'am Rowie. My name's Anton Sevilla-Liu, and we just came here from Japan. I'm here with my student and one of my teammates, and we're here to get some breathe some cura personalis air here in Ateneo. So thank you for having me, and I'm happy that you're here to learn with me today. So I was telling Ma'am Rowie that we have to start on time because I put a little bit too much on my slides. I get a little bit carried away with the kind of content I present. So we're gonna go for about 75 minutes. I'm gonna lecture for 75 minutes, and that'll leave us around 10 minutes for Q&A. I know that's not a lot of time for Q&A, but if you have questions, yeah, I'm also gonna leave my email address up. So I I always enjoy thinking with people, so please feel free. So, what are the questions that I'm hoping to address today? First is how do you approach education? How do you approach education? And we have a lot of talk about interdisciplinarity, and people take this idea of interdisciplinarity in different ways. And I really want to look at in what kind of interdisciplinarity is necessary, and what are the challenges that kind of interdisciplinarity poses. And so I'm going to do it by introducing a field that I do that I'm associate professor for called clinical pedagogy, which is not very common, so I'll introduce it. And then second question I want to look at, and perhaps for most of the people here, looking at you, a lot of you are very young people. The question of how can we help students find their way through life, and that's not just us teachers helping you, but that's also you students helping yourselves. One of the major parts of education is self-education. I mean, the teachers, we can try to control what we give you, but at the end of the day, how you're going to take that is going to be up to you as a student. So, for those of you who aren't teachers, please know that this lecture is still perfectly related to you. I think, as we think about how can you take in your education in a way that's actually going to help you find your way through life. Okay, and then the third one is what are the challenges of this pragmatic vision of education? Um, Pardon the foul language, but uh, I have an issue with bullshit. And I pragmatic education can become bullshit if we're not careful. And so one of the things I'm going to do is look at the challenges. What makes pragmatic education seemingly simple actually so difficult? And how can contextual behavioral science help us? Okay, so that's what I'm hoping to do today. I mean, all of you who are here, I hope you have something to latch on to, I think you'll have different ways of taking up these questions, but I hope you keep your question in mind as you try to look at these things. Okay, so just a bit about myself. So I'm from the Ateneo, a very, very I finished, I did my AB in philosophy here. I was also actually a pre-med student, but I finished my AB in philosophy in, I think, 2005. And then I did my master's here. And then I taught at the Department of Philosophy, also at JSP. I taught until 2011. And then right after, if you, I don't know if you know about the tsunami, 311 tsunami, that's exactly the time when I came to Japan. And so I took my PhD in Kyoto in this place called the Chibunken. And I was doing Watsuji Tetsuro's relational ethics. And, I don't know how many of you like Japan. A lot of people like Japan. I love Japan. I was so excited to be there. I would literally do cartwheels in the library when no one was looking. But it slowly hit me that the way that they do philosophy research in Japan, it didn't exactly have Kura personnel. I know that Kura personnel is something trite, something you're also used to, but they didn't have it there. And that really, really messed me up. And so I started, getting lost when I was doing my PhD. And somewhere in the middle of my PhD, I started collaborating with Kyoto University. So I wasn't at Kyoto University, but I started collaborating with them. And actually now I have the fortune to be teaching with them on occasion. But there's this department called clinical pedagogy, and I was with the teacher who was doing philosophy of education. And because philosophy of education is connected directly to education, they weren't abstract about it. They weren't just, okay, we're going to do research for research's sake, but they were actually concerned with how are these ideas going to connect to people? How are these ideas going to help people form themselves, become what they're trying to be? And that really hit me. So I started moving into that field. And so when I graduated in 2015, I actually got a job not in what do you call this? Not in pure philosophy, but in philosophy of education, and eventually in an education department. So right now, I work at the Kyushu University. I don't know if you've been to Fukuoka. Great food, but Kyushu University is there, and I'm at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which is one of the leaders in Japan for university education. So core curriculum, some of you hate core curriculum, but if you go to a university where it's absolutely absent, well, there are struggles with that too. And so Kyushu University is one of the, well, it's the leading university right now for pushing how to do a core curriculum in Japan. And so I'm part of that, and that's what I do now. Okay, so just a little bit about clinical ped. What is clinical ped? Um, I have this little diagram up from a book by Wada Shuji. And so we have clinical pedagogy, and it's actually a mix between, so it's in the education department, but there's this field called, how do you translate this to English? Philosophy of the human person in education, or educational philosophy, educational philosophical anthropology, or something like that. But this is the philosophy side, and then you have clinical psychology, and then you also have clinical and personality psychology, and then they put that all together to form this thing called clinical ped. Okay, so basically you have a philosophy side and you have a psychology side, and why do you need to put those two things together? So this is part of the whole interdisciplinarity question, yeah. And so what happened here was basically in the 80s, Japan was going through a major mental health crisis. So for those of you who love Japan, there are a lot of good things about Japan, but there are huge challenges in Japan, especially if you look at our youth suicide rate. So the suicide rate was very, very high. It's still very high now, but nowhere near as high as it was back in the 80s. Exam hell was terrible. Not only that, you had student violence, bullying was a major problem. Some of you have heard of hikikomori, shut-in syndrome, and that was a major thing. And so looking at this, basically, you had most education specialists, their focus was students in general. What do students in general need? How are we supposed to educate students in general? And then you have this in general crap going on. And then when you actually try to run it, then there are these people who just start to fall by the wayside. These people who are just not able to ride with that program, and you fall apart in the process of it. And so what happened there was they started to pull from clinical psychology. So there's this guy, Kawai Hayao, who's one of the most important clinical psychologists in Japan. And basically he said, we have to take clinical psychology as central to education. We can't just teach people and think about generalities. We have to start considering individual people. And one of the interesting things that happened here is instead of thinking about education as just the normal experience, they started to see the importance of well, not just the importance of, but the essentialness of crisis in education. In a sense, when we think about crisis in education, some people think it's only the people who have mental health problems who have crisis in education, and that is not true. So for those of you who are in grad school, maybe I shouldn't say this. The mental health incidence rate in graduate school is actually very, very high, And the thing is, you're among the best students, right? But precisely because you're good students, sometimes you have a very, very hard time. And so that changed the way of thinking, not just of pedagogy, that, hey, let's try to consider crisis in education. Let's look at all these clinical disorders, all of these clinical challenges in education. Not only that, but it started to change the way they did clinical psychology as well. And so instead of just doing clinical psychology, okay, you have a mental health problem. We'd rather we not talk about mental health problems, but okay, fine. Maybe we have to bring you to a counselor. Not that kind of thing, but starting to think about what are the mental health demands of ordinary people? What are the mental health demands of just your average student or even students who are doing excellently? Okay, so they put the two things together. So not just limiting it to problem solving type of clinical psychology, but critically rethinking education via what the human can be. So not just looking at, okay, how do we prevent mental health, but you have to start thinking about human flourishing. What does it mean to become a human being through education? And that was where the philosophy part started to contribute. Okay, so you have the psychology part, you have this philosophy part, and they start to put them together in clinical psychology. And I'm going to show you today one way to put those two together by looking at pragmatism, which is a philosophy, and what do you call this? CBS, contextual behavioral science, which is a kind of psychology. And I'm going to show you how they come together. But just a hint, they're not going to come together in a simple way. And so there's going to be a mutual influence, a mutual transformation that happens when they start to engage each other. Okay, so let's move on to the content, the meat of the lecture. So let's start with the philosophy side, pragmatism and education. So pragmatism, it starts with, I don't know if Doc Ibana's here, he was just telling me, you have to think about Charles Peirce, I've only read one article about Peirce. I don't really like Peirce. Sorry, but so pragmatism. There are different pragmatists. It's a kind of philosophy that came from America, from the U.S., heavily influenced by the Civil War in the U.S., heavily influenced by modernization, but also heavily influenced by evolutionary thinking. Okay, and so it starts with Charles Sanders Peirce, and then you get William James, John Dewey, George Herbert Mead. So I do mostly Dewey and Mead. I do a little bit of James. But anyway, James is one of the most popular ones, and basically it starts with a view of truth. Now, this is going to sound abstract, okay, but bear with me, hang with me here. Ideas become true just insofar as they help us to get into satisfactory relation with other parts of our experience. That's kind of a weird way to look at truth, isn't it? Because when you think, a lot of times when you think truth, it's true, I mean, is it them facts, And when we had this whole fake news thing, there was the history issue. A lot of it was, truth is objective. You can't distort the truth. Now, this is going to come into tension with that, but hopefully in a productive way. Okay, so just to continue on that thought, theories thus become instruments, not answers to enigmas in which we can rest. We don't lie back upon them. We move forward. Okay, so what I want to point out is that it's not about, a lot of times when you think about, so with pragmatism, you have plural truths. Okay, so pragmatism was a criticism of rationalism. Rationalism is when you start with what should make sense, when you start with logic, when you start with the abstracted things, and then you try to explain reality, the mess of reality, on the basis of these noble principles. Now, absolute, when you talk about, so there's one truth in absolutism, right? And when you talk about pragmatism and you start with the particulars, of course, you're going to start to have multiple truths. And a lot of people think of that in a very, what does Paul say? Like the postmodern fool, it's like, oh, there are many truths, But pragmatism is not that kind of, there are many truths just for the sake of saying there are many truths. But basically, what pragmatism is saying is we live the truth. We don't just know the truth. Truth is how we live our lives as Homo sapiens. And so when you think about the truth, there's a danger sometimes when, even if it's a very good idea, even if it seems rationally true, sometimes you just end up getting stuck in it. And it's not actually helping you live your life. Just to take a therapy example, one of the issues now is with environmental catastrophe, impending environmental catastrophe. Our planet is screwed. Is that true? Yes. If you think about it every day, every moment of your life, my plan is screwed, my plan is screwed, my plan is screwed, and you stop working, you stop studying, what the point of doing anything? The plan is screwed anyway. Now, how is that truth actually working for you? So, in a sense, what they're saying here is truth is not just out there, truth is something that we live. So, when we look at it that way, when we try to be responsible for the truth in that way, then instead of just getting stuck in what makes sense, how can the truth be part of us flexibly facing the reality before us? And so that's the basic drive of pragmatism in William James. Basically, how can we look at the truth as something that is part of our pragma, the process of actually living our lives? Okay, so John Dewey takes up this idea, and this is where we get to education. What does that mean for education? If truth is not just these pre-given things that are absolutely, absolutely true, and I just have to shove it into your brain and you get it and you're educated, then what is it? What is education about? And so, in a sense, what he's saying here is education is about learning to find your way in life. Education is about learning to find your way in life, to grow in the various challenges reality presents. So, not just giving you some abstract truth, but helping you find your way to the truth in the way that lets you live well, in a way that going back to the quote above, to help you get into satisfactory relation with other parts of your experience. So does this truth actually help you move forward in life with the different challenges that you have? And so to make this a little bit more concrete, to make this a little bit more practical, let's look at, so what is the demand for education? Okay, and what kind of education is it criticizing? And the kind of education it's criticizing is the kind of education that doesn't form a functional whole. Okay, so if we think about, I'm not sure how education is here in the Ateneo. I always found my education in Ateneo to be very alive, to be very real. But that's not true for everybody. And that's not true for every class, and our experience can be varied. So maybe you have some part of your life that's like this, but there are some classes where they give you a lot of information, and it's good information, and it could be useful somewhere. You just don't know how. So you have a lot of fixed information, and then they make you jump through certain hoops, like solve these equations or answer these tests or do these problems. You don't necessarily care about those problems. You don't necessarily care. I mean, this guy's swimming at this speed and this guy's walking at this speed, and how far apart are they going to be? And you don't necessarily give a damn, and you don't really know how that's going to work for you in your life. But well, here's the test, so you do it. And they give you tests that don't necessarily connect to anything you're interested in, but well, you got to be graded and you got to get that grade. So, and what happens if you do it well is, well, you get to memorize it, you get to jam it into your head. Yay, you get a good grade. If you don't do it well, then, and there can be emotional consequences to that. When you go through classes and you're trying to learn and it's not sticking and you're getting bad grades and people are telling you you're stupid and you start to feel bad about yourself. And sometimes it can be pretty damn traumatic. And this whole time, you're moving, you're doing things, but you're dancing to somebody else's tune. It's not really your aims, but it's the teacher's aims. Okay. And so this is the basic thing that John Dewey was trying to criticize, this rote view of education. Now, again, I'm not saying this is absolute crap. I'm not saying it's 100% bad. The problem, they're giving you a lot of things that might be useful. The problem is it coming to you in a way that you will be able to make it useful? Because the thing is, that's not actually how life works. I teach in grad school now. It's so interesting. A lot of the people who struggle with grad school are also the people who are very good students, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, "Sir, which of my ideas am I supposed to use for this problem?" But life doesn't tell you. Life doesn't say, okay, you're going to use your calculus, your math 21, and then this is the problem. It's not like that. It's going to give you this problem. You don't know if you're going to use your computer programming skills. You don't know if you're going to use your people skills. You don't know if you're going to use your chat GPT Begum skills. You don't know which of the skills you're going to have to summon, right? Which of the various things are you actually going to have to use, right? And that's how, so you have to survey the situations yourself. And then you have to look at the situation and figure out, how the hell am I going to move forward in the situation? And then you're going to pick from the various things, the various skills that you actually have. You can't just say, oh, well, I would have solved this if I knew this, but I don't, so I'm screwed. And you sit there, okay, I can't solve it with that because I don't have that. What do I have? And then you try to put things together. And it's not just, I do something and teacher, do I get an A? It's you do it and then you have to know, how do I know if what I'm doing is actually working? Like let's say you're trying to run a project as a project manager. You don't get to say, hey, do I get an A? But you have to look. It's like, okay, people are kind of scared of me, but they're actually also doing what I'm telling them what to do. So is this a good thing? Is this a good situation? And then basically learning how are you going to assess situations, and also from the basis of observing the consequences of what you're doing, then trying to try different things. If they work, you try to strengthen them. If they don't work, you try not to do that. But either way, whether it goes well or it doesn't go well, you're learning, and that's how life works. But the problem is, if that's not how we're educated, then in a sense, all of these skills that we know, all of these antecedent information that we know, do you actually know how to employ that when you come into a real situation? So that's Dewey's point. Dewey's point is that students have to be able to, learning is about having workable truth, having pragmatic truth, a kind of truth that allows you to come into a healthier relationship with life. So that means, just like this cycle here, students have to have a relevant situation, right? Be in a situation that's actually something you give a damn about. And then if you give a damn, then you think, okay, what do I want to make out of this situation? What does it mean to get forward in the situation? Like if you talk about the political problems in the Philippines, or if you talk about the poverty problem in the Philippines, or if you talk about romance problems in the Philippines, and you think about things like that and you care about it, then there's somewhere you want to go. And if there's somewhere you want to go, for the first time, you have a way to evaluate which of your information are you going to use, what are you going to try, and then if you try it, is this working or not working? If there's nowhere you want to go, you have no way of saying if you're getting closer or farther from your goal. So that's the point of pragmatic education. Okay, how can we have educational situations that prepare us for how the challenges of life are actually going to work? And this is heavily influenced by Darwin. Now, who teaches like this? It has similarities to active learning. In Kyushu University, one of the big things we're pushing is active learning. I actually teach this book by LD Fink. So, learning by doing, knowledge, skills, motivation, metacognition, looking at different aspects of the human being is well and good. There are good parts about it. However, one of the issues I have with this active learning approach is, does this mean an architecture of a learning experience that guarantees the building of these cognitive skills? Think about it as a teacher, if you want this kind of education, are you gonna try to make it airtight, to make sure that 100% is a real situation, 100% you'll have your own aims, and you're gonna try things first? And this is the interesting thing here. Basically, the point of Dewey is that airtight architecture of a learning situation actually destroys the very thing that you're trying to do. Because the only way to make it airtight is to be able to forecast exactly what kind of a student you have. And that means you start to generalize. What is a general student like? What are the general skills like? In general, what is the current level of aptitude? In general, what are our aims in this particular pedagogic situation? Okay, in general, what kind of cognitive skills are we trying to build? In general, in general, in general, in general. Now, if you remember the tension between absolutism and pragmatism, we're not trying to go to noble ideas. We're trying to go to how do these actually work? And when you're looking at how do these actually work, you're not up here. You're looking at actual particular people. Is it going to work for this person? Is it going to work for this person? It's not cognitive skills in general. What does this person need to move forward? What does this person need to move forward? Do you get what I mean? So it's a different approach. And in a sense, the attempt to make it airtight kills it. And so we were having this discussion for the past 2 days, and we were talking about a narrative approach to education. And in a sense, this logical scientific view of students, this abstracting, looking at general properties, that's important for a lot of things. But one of the dangers, it really brings you to this distant view where you don't see the actual students with their actual stories. And so one of the major themes that came up for us in the past 2 days is when we talk about cura personalis, minus all the BS. Cura personalis is about seeing actual students with actual faces, with actual stories and actual struggles in their lives, and trying to see how do I make education actually help these people. Okay, now sounds, I don't know, I'm looking at you, some of you are seem enthused. Some of you are smiling. It's a good idea, yeah? It's a good idea, but it doesn't work. Um, it's painful for me to admit, but I worked very, very hard to make this happen in Japan, and it many times does not work. And this is not just for Japan. So the examples I'll give are primarily about Japan, but this is true even in the Philippines. I've seen this happen. I'm not going to name demographics here, but there are particular students who particularly tend to struggle with this problem. But this is a problem in the Ateneo too. So I'll be talking about Japan, but if you can keep linking it to your own situation, I'd really appreciate that. So try to think about these situations and try to see if you can recognize them. Recognize them in your friends, recognize them in yourself, perhaps as you go through your education. So number one, students and teachers are so used to giving abstract scenarios or no scenario at all that coming up or dealing with relevant scenarios can be so daunting. It's hard as a teacher to make it real. And for students, sometimes it's hard when it does become real. You know what I mean? So, sorry, it's weird feedback, right? Yeah, sorry, someone's, yeah. Okay, and then the second one, students are so used to doing what the teacher wants them to do, they don't come up with their own aims, you know? So it sounds great, right? Figure things out for yourself, man. But if you haven't spent your whole life doing that, if you've spent your whole life following, okay, I did this, I'm a good student, I did what you told me to do, and then suddenly your teacher says, you're gonna figure this stuff out. And it's scary. It's a scary thing. And so there's this part of them that can feel, hey, why don't you just tell me what to do? Why don't you just tell me if my work is good enough? I don't want to have to figure it out for myself. Okay, and the number three, experimental learning requires not being sure of your answer and the importance of failing. You know, again, you're trying different things. If it goes well, you strengthen that. If it doesn't go well, then you know to avoid that. Things not going well is a very important learning experience. But has your educational history allowed you to think that? I know so many students, even here in the Ateneo, who are terrified of failing anything. But the minute you fail, that's a place where you can grow. That's a great discovery. But are we prepared to see that as a discovery? And this is where I get to contextual behavioral science. So pragmatism, you know, it happened 1900s, early 1900s. It wasn't closely tied to the empirics of psychology. They hadn't actually seen how students would take it. They were trying to do that in Chicago school, but the data starts really coming out, starts really getting nitty gritty when you get to the contemporary period with contextual behavioral science. So CBS is an approach to psychology. The theoretical basis is evolutionary theory, but also Skinner's radical behaviorism. Some of you will get turned off by the idea of Skinner and behaviorism, but the whole idea of flexibly learning from consequences, what we were talking about in pragmatism, that's actually Skinner too. And then William James's pragmatism. So, you know, we think like SOSS, SOH are two separate things, right? But actually, one of the top movements in psychology is drawing directly from William James. So I think it's important to know that at the forefront of things connect. Okay, and then it also has an experimental basis. They don't just do therapy, they actually also run experiments to see how human beings think. This is called relational frame theory. I remember when I first learned about thinking from Heidegger, thinking and language was such a difficult thing for me. The first time I actually started to figure it out was when I did RFT with CBS. And then scientific basis for a whole family of practices. Does anyone know acceptance and commitment therapy? Has anyone even heard of this before? No? Anyway, has anyone heard of mindfulness? Okay, so it's the cousin sister. Mindfulness comes from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. This one comes from behavioral therapy. So they're sisters. So ACT. Okay, and then the second one is pro-social, which they use for groups. They use it for schools. And then also DNAV, they use it for kids. And just some disclosure here, I think it's very important for us to cross, to approach other disciplines. But there's a certain danger if people outside of therapy approach psychological ideas without any training whatsoever. Because sometimes when you just read books, it looks like you get it. You think that you get it, but you don't necessarily get it. And so I was one of those people. I thought I got it, and then I actually started going to formal training for CBS and realizing, oh my God, I don't actually get this. And so I was actually trained for this eventually. I learned, especially from Matt Villata, who does clinical RFT. So how to use this theory of how the mind works, but in therapy. I did also contextual schema therapy with Rob Brockman, and I'm also a member of ACBS, which is the global organization for CBS. I also publish with their journal. But anyway, so I do both. I do philosophy. I also do this one. And basically, the philosophy of science behind it is called contextualism. Now, this is actually a very important idea in our talk the other day. But contextualism is an approach to science which looks at behavior not by abstracting general rules for a population. So, when you look at people's behavior and it's like, oh, okay, this is anxiety. Oh, okay, this is depression. Oh, okay, this is, what do you call this? Somatoform disorder. When you're doing that, that's basically looking at people as statistic samples and their position within a population. It's a very abstracting view. That's called formism. Contextualism is not that. The other one it isn't is looking at fixed cause and effect. So you're depressed, must be the serotonin. You have anxiety, must be the GABA receptors and things like that. That's also a mechanistic view. Okay, so contextualism is a science, but what it's focusing on is how particular individuals navigate a unique context. Okay, so when we don't like the generalization of science, let's remember science is not the enemy. There are many different kinds of science. And science is not always about coming up with what they call nomothetic rules. Okay, it's not always about generalization. Part of science is about knowing, before you can even generalize, you have to know what are the possibilities of behavior? What are the possible phenomena that can come up so I even know what to measure? And that is the field of contextualism. How do particular beings respond in particular contexts? The science of that is contextualism. Pragmatism is part of that. Narrative theory is part of that. If you've heard of phenomenological psychology, it's also part of that. But anyway, it's a whole family of approaches. Okay. And one main thing to this acceptance commitment therapy, CBS, is functional analysis. So I was mentioning this over and over again in the workshop. But functional analysis is when you examine where a particular student is getting stuck. Okay. So you don't just say in general you need to be like this and like this and like this and like this. But I have to look at an actual student and see, hey, what's working for this student? What's not working for this student? Like for instance, right? The ability to reflect, is that a good thing or a bad thing? A lot of self-identity problems can actually happen from an excess of self-reflection, where it starts looping and looping and looping, and all you're thinking about is who am I, who am I, who am I, that you're not able to see how your view of who you are actually affects the way you relate to the world. But obviously, if you don't have enough reflection, is also a problem, right? How do you know what's too much or what's not enough? You don't. It's called functional analysis. You actually have to look at a particular person and see, is it helping this person? How is it functioning for this person? And so it's very different from grading. It's very different from splitting people up into DSM categories. But you're trying to look at actual students and saying, how are things working for the student? Like discipline, you got to work harder, man. For some people, that helps them. For some people, that's the very reason why they freak out, why they put too much pressure on themselves and they break apart. So again, functional analysis, looking at each student in a scientific way, but in a particular way. Okay, so today, in the spirit of functional analysis, I'm going to look at a case. So let's talk about this person, A-san. I'll call her A-san. She used to be an excellent student. In Japan, they call them Iko, back in high school. And she's very nervous about the uncertainties of learning, all of this active learning stuff. It's like, just tell me what to do, Very harsh self-criticism every time she makes a mistake. Maybe some of you can relate with that. She knows she wants to do well, but she doesn't know what exactly she wants out of learning. She just knows she has to be good at it or else she's shit. And she has difficulties kind of seeing the big picture of where life is going. She's trying to, move forward the way she's expected to. That's something people can relate with. The interesting thing here is you see the difference from clinical psychology. Clinical psychology, you usually think, okay, someone who's suicidal, someone who's dropping out, someone who's not coming to school. This kid is a good kid. She's a great student. But just because she's a great student doesn't mean she's struggling. She isn't struggling. Okay, so let's try to use that case and let's look at the different aspects of psychological flexibility. So basically, functional analysis, you look at the particular experience of the student and you ask, Where is the student getting stuck? And what is getting in the way of their ability to flexibly respond to the situation? That's called psychological flexibility. There are 6 aspects that they usually look at: diffusion, acceptance, attention, perspective, committed action, and values. But these are just heuristics to allow us to look at different facets of the human being. Okay, so let's start with the question of aims. Okay, so without aims, a student cannot evaluate consequences or adjust behavior. The only way you can flexibly adjust the way you do things, the only way you can try, is if you know what counts as good trying and what counts as bad trying. If you have no aims in the first place, you cannot evaluate how you're doing. You cannot steer if you don't know where you're trying to go. Okay, so Dewey says the net conclusion is that acting with the name is all one with acting intelligently. To foresee a terminus of an act is to have a basis upon which to observe, to select, and to order objects in our own capacities. Somewhere in this page, he actually says it much more roughly, to the effect that if a student doesn't have aims in a class, if you don't have a reason to be here, there's nothing intelligent about what's going on. This is a stupid situation. Now, the thing though is, some students, they don't have that experience in their lives of being asked what they care about in a situation. They're just told, oh, you should do this, oh, you should do that. It's like, Mom, I want to try this. No, you don't like that. You like this. And when you go through that year after year, day after day in your life, after a while, you stop asking, what do I want? What are my aims? And you just ask, what do you want? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? I remember I asked my students to talk about their narrative identity. I had a student who told me, what do you want me to say? I was like, well, shit. That's a problem. And so this is the thing. So if we're going to, this tells you why pragmatism is not so easy. It looks simple. You can get it in one chart. It's not so easy because having aims isn't easy. And so acceptance and commitment therapy will have different ways. How do we help people find out? How do we help people tap in again to their own personal response to things? To learn to feel when they do something, does this feel meaningful or not meaningful? When they learn something, is this learning something? It's not just, am I good at it? Am I not good at it? But is this something that's taking me to a kind of coherence in my life that feels right for me? And getting people to listen to themselves again. So actually, in the previous workshop, we actually did this sweet spot exercise. Thinking about times in your life, actual experiences in your education that felt meaningful. Not telling you what should be meaningful, but getting you back to the experiences. What actually felt meaningful in your own learning situation? And a lot of people, when you first ask them this, they won't know what you're talking about. And it takes time. It takes time. Slowly learn to listen to themselves again and get that compass back. And so, if you're able to see that, then you're able to notice your personal response. You're able to use your own experiences to motivate future action. So if you remember that it feels good to learn something new when you're trying to sign up for a different course, a different class, then you have that to motivate you, to push you, to strengthen you, to guide you through the pragmatic situations. So when we think about these like DLQ, DLQ, all of these self-exploration type classes, some people say this is a bloody waste of time, Is it? Now, if you already know who you are, great. But a lot of people don't. And that's why you do it. Okay, so that was the previous quadrant, yeah, looking at this whole idea of values and committed action, doing what matters. Now we look at opening up. Okay, so when you're trying to do pragmatic learning, as with ASAN, the problem is certain sticky thoughts and difficult feelings can start to get in the way of finding your way through life. Like some people have the thought of, if I make mistakes, I'm a bad student. I'm never going to be good enough. And you want to try things. You want to go to that Eddie Boy Calasan's class. You want to go see this terror class. You want to try. I saw Father Dakanay the other just today, and he was saying, I was like, "We're so happy to see you." It's like, not too many people say that. But sometimes you want to, it's like, what is this Father Dakanay? I want to see what this is like. But then you think, if I fail, I'm shit. And so that thought can just block you from trying things. that thought can block you from experiencing different things. And so, when you're thinking about personal values, what do I want? But who cares what I want? I'm supposed to follow these things. Again, a thought can block you. Actually, the very idea of pragmatism, not some absolute truth that you can just rest easy in, but finding your way, that very idea of that very epistemology requires diffusion, requires getting past sticky thoughts and being flexible in your relationship with cognition. Okay, so interesting though, RFT says, you can't actually erase thoughts or change the way, just has anyone ever, like for people who overthink, has anyone told you, just stop overthinking? You just gotta think positive. Easier said than done, right? It's pretty annoying when they say that. I mean, try, stop thinking negative thoughts. Am I thinking negative thoughts? Oh shit, I think this is a negative. Oh. That's not how the brain works. And so one of the things RFD is saying, and this actually comes from the pragmatist George Herbert Mead, his idea of voluntary attention, but basically we may not be able to delete thoughts, but what we can do is we can change the way we relate with thoughts. I have students who ask me, is this self-critic ever going to go away? Am I ever going to stop thinking, oh, maybe I suck, maybe no one's ever going to like me, maybe I'm a loser, maybe I shouldn't even be here? Is that voice ever going to go away? And I tell them a lot of times, maybe no. But the way you listen to it can change. And so this is the whole idea of diffusion. And then also part of this, of course, is an emotional experience, right? When you have a fear of making mistakes, but when you're afraid, what happens? Do you make more mistakes or less mistakes? Sometimes you freak out so much and then you make more mistakes. And so you start getting afraid of being afraid. Because if I get afraid, then I'm going to make more mistakes. So I mustn't be afraid, but oh no, am I getting afraid? Oh shit, this fear. And I'm sorry for those who find this triggering, but this is the mental process of getting a panic attack, which I know because I get them too. Anyway, so acceptance is really about not making bad feelings go away, but noticing the sensations of fear and accepting, hey, here's fear. It's already here. Now let me feel it. But at the same time, not necessarily riding with what fear usually makes you do. Okay, so again, it's hard to be pragmatic and flexible with your learning if you don't have these skills of flexibly relating to your thinking. I have these timestamps, I never follow them. That's okay. And then let's move to the third. Let's try to not be too carried away with my talking. Okay, so again with Asan, one of her struggles was, her attention gets so focused on the present task. I gotta do this, I gotta get it right. It's like, and all she sees is this exam. Why are you even taking this exam? All she sees is this project. Why are you even taking this project? It gets hard to see that big picture. And so what you see here is it's not just thinking process, it's attentional process. How are you standing before this reality? How wide is your optic? And also part of that is how she sees herself. So instead of thinking about what she wants to become, she gets stuck in, I have to be a good kid. And then she's always, when she's like presenting, she's thinking, what are other people thinking of me? She can imagine them getting disappointed, even though they're smiling. And some of you are nodding and maybe understand what I'm talking about, but this can be very difficult. So what we see here is that it's not just learning how to deal with your thoughts and feelings or your values, but also part of it is attention processes. How do you learn to move your attention flexibly? Like right now, I'm afraid, but how do I focus on your faces and think, what are you going to learn from this? That's also a perspective shift. There's a strong temptation for me to look at myself. Am I talking okay? Am I talking too fast? Am I freaking out? But I can think about you. Perspective shift. So that's a challenge there. And when you talk about mindfulness, actually a major push of mindfulness was how to help us learn to get in touch, to become aware of, and to learn to work with our attentional processes and our perspective taking processes. So there's this idea of self as context, not just getting stuck in a particular perspective, but learning to stand back, to take a broader perspective, to observe flexibly what's going on inside and outside. Okay, so the basic idea here, pragmatism, simple, sounds easy, sounds pretty good, sounds pretty nice, but psychological flexibility, it's hard. And I'm not talking about this from a book. I'm talking about this from trying and failing over and over again. Pragmatic education is simple, but if you think it's simple, you're going to miss just how hard it can be. And a lot of those challenges have to do with psychological demands of how do you respond to each student as they struggle, as they get stuck in this process of finding their way forward. Okay, so this whole idea of clinical pedagogy, act as clinical pedagogy. So the point is, and I've said this over and over again, particular students, whether they're good students or they're bad students, they will fall into struggles, right? And so, teachers, we learn about learning theory, but do we learn about functional analysis? We learn about developmental theory and all of these zoom out stuff. But in the classroom, who of you here is the average student? Who of you here has the general cognitive structures? None of you. And so how do we learn? Are we also learning functional analysis, a scientific way of looking at this person in front of me? And so in a sense, you see here the scientific part of cura personalis. So cura personalis as responding with this functional analytic understanding. What is this person going through? How do I help them? But also very importantly, a lot of times it's not how do I help them, it's who's going to help them because it's not going to be me. Now, a lot of in the workshop, this came up over and over again. How can you do this with everyone if you have 150 students? And just two ideas that came up that I was thinking about for the past 2 days. First is leaving gaps in your lesson plan for flexible response. This philosopher of education, Gert Biesta, he has this term pedagogy of interruption. I can't perfectly architecture things when it comes to shaping how a particular subject, this person, is going to find their way through life. And so if I know I'm not teaching general student, I'm teaching this person, do I make room for this person? So having a jam-packed syllabus is not a sign of perfection. It's a sign of missing out on the people in front of you. And the gaps are not laziness. The gaps are not lack of planning. The gaps are responsibility toward the actual subject in front of me. And in a sense, we talk about pragmatic responsiveness. I want you to be able to go through life and flexibly respond to situations. As a teacher, am I able to model that? Am I able to, as I pragmatically prepare for this situation of teaching you, am I able to flexibly respond to you? Or am I teaching you how to be inflexible in how perfect my plans are? And then the other thing is, as you learn this functional analysis, and this is something I saw from my own experience, as you learn from this functional analysis, your perspective taking starts to expand. As you probably can tell from the way I'm talking right now, I have an excessively large ego. I am very, very self-confident. Most of my students are not. And it's very, very hard to teach low self-confidence people if you can't imagine what it's like. But now when I say things, I think it's exciting. But in the back of my head, I know, people with inferiority complex, they're looking at you right now and they hate you. So you start to populate your mind with more alternatives. How are people going to take this message? And that perspective taking is also a very important skill, I think, for teachers. Okay, so this is the idea. This is the first half, well, one quarter of my idea. When we respond to the individual, educate them, we want them to be flexible, but that means that we have to have the skills to respond to them and their struggles, how they get stuck. And so here you put together the education with the philosophy, with the psychology. But it's not just individuals. So let's start with a case, right? So A-san, and this is a real case, she did learn to think for herself. She did learn to assert herself, and that took a lot of work on her part. But the interesting thing was, she was getting more confident, but every time she was with a group, every time she had to be with these people, suddenly she kind of lapsed back. Have any of you experienced that? You think you've gotten over some problem, and then you get into a particular situation, and suddenly you're back being that old shithead that you don't want to be? But that's the interesting thing about how human beings work. What does context do to us, right? And so, and then she starts to, overcompensate. Sometimes she just shrinks. Sometimes she overcompensates and tries to dominate the group. She gets very sensitive to criticism, and when she feels she's not being treated fairly, she can be a bit abrasive, and sometimes people don't like her for it. And so this is where we see, yes, we're trying to help this particular student, but can it stop at an individualistic level? So Dewey's Democracy and Education, which talked about the pragmatic education, was about learning for democratic life. The reason why people have to flexibly find their way together is they're going to be part of a society that is flexibly finding its way together. You get what I mean? So it's not just do your own thing, you're out in the wilderness, but how do we faced with different social problems that no one has one answer to, how do we find our way, not alone, but together? And so active learning, even, I have criticisms of active learning because it gets too cognitivist, but it expands into cooperative and collaborative learning. So they see if we're going to learn in real situations via action, we also need to teach people how to work in groups. And so the problem with this, though, is it does tend to be a little bit cognitivist. So I will do a contextual take on it, which is called prosocial. So prosocial is an approach for building collaborative groups applied to schools and other institutions. It's built on CBS. So the CBS people, Paul Atkins, I'm actually writing a paper with him right now. But he is a CBS person. He works with Stephen Hayes, who's the founder of CBS and ACT. And it's also built on evolutionary science. So that's Wilson. And then Eleanor Ostrom. So Wilson worked with Eleanor Ostrom. I don't know if anyone, economics, DS, but Ostrom won the Nobel Prize for economics. And what she won for was basically finding out how do people successfully share common pool resources? Not top down, it's supposed to be this way, but looking at real examples. Okay? Instead of tragedy of the commons where people exploit the hell out of a resource, when are the times where people are able to share a common resource successfully without ruining things? And so whether it's water for almond planting in California, or sharing from a particular reservoir, or fishing villages, looking at actual cases, and they tried to understand, to functionally analyze groups and try to see, so just like you're looking at the individual, you don't just say, oh, you're supposed to be like this to be flexible. I have to look at you. It's the same thing for a group. Same thing for group work. The same thing for a department, for a class. It's the same thing for a school. It's the same thing for a country. There's no one size fits all. I have to look at this group and ask myself, why are they not able to find their way together? Okay, and then they'll have 8 different CDPs, core design principles, that let them look at different aspects of cooperation and where it can go wrong. So I'm going to go through that one at a time, so no need to worry too much about it. Okay, so let's look at first shared aims. Okay, so John Dewey again, he says, from these 2 traits, we derive our standard for democracy. How numerous and varied are the interests which are consciously shared? How full and free is the interplay with other forms of association? So the first one here, how numerous and varied are the interests which are consciously shared? The basic idea, and try not to think about a nation because it can be really, really too big. Try to think about a smaller group. Try to think about a group like your friends, people whose faces your barkada, things like that. And then try to understand, try to think, how do we find our way together? Okay? Like, let's say one person in the barkada just went through a really, really traumatic experience and is now suicidal, and your whole barkada is on suicide watch. You have no idea what to do with this thing. How do you find your way together? And the first thing that you're going to need to be able to find your way together is you have a situation, a shared situation, and you're trying to find your way out of it. So if there's no sense of what's our shared situation and where are we trying to go, forget it. It's just not going to happen. The only way you can find your way is if you know where you're trying to go. And so again, so it starts just like pragmatism, but now on the level of the group, an awareness of the situation and where are we trying to go? Where are we trying to go? So that's CDP, core design principle 1, shared identity and purpose. Okay, what are we trying to do? We want to be a group that takes care of our friends. Our friend is having a really rough time. How are we going to take care of this person? That might be the shared aim, And is this aim shared by people? Because sometimes, sometimes we're actually the ones making mental health worse for our friend too. Sometimes we like making jokes about this person, making fun of him, but now he's not taking it very well anymore. He's falling apart. So if people are like, I don't actually really care about taking care of this guy, then it's kind of hard. You're not going to find your way together as a group. So the only way to find your way together as a group is if you actually buy in, you know. Now, the interesting thing here, and this, Paul Atkins was really stressing this, when they do this in companies, so they're doing it in UN now, they're doing it in different companies, they're doing it even in the military, doing it in different settings. But one of the things they found is that some companies will say, we don't really care about what individuals want. As a company, this is what we want. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's no real buy-in, because they're only going to do it out of that one small part of themselves that feels obligated by the company. There's no real power when people aren't actually interested in finding their way. And so what they actually start with is from individual values. Why are you in this group? Why are you in this barkada? Why does this barkada matter? Some person might be in a particular group because he feels like he's accepted. Some person might be in a group because he just kind of likes chilling with these people, and somehow he likes the vibe. Someone might like being in this group because he has a crush on this person. But so when it comes together, the individuals together, and what can we share together? What can we value together? If I care about these people in my group and we come together and we cooperate, what do we value as a group? And maybe that value might be, hey, we take care of each other. Hey, we're there for each other. Or hey, when the world is pressure, we're the safe space. So basically, it has to come from the personal values too. So you see this, in a sense, the individual and the group level are not cut apart, but there's something that connect to each other, which is again also a very democratic idea. So there's this idea of a Gert Bista, who's also a pragmatist. He says the deliberative approach just points at the importance of the transformation of individual wants into collective needs. This is why I'm in the group. This is why this friend's in the group. This is why this friend's in the group. But if you start to hear that, you're not just thinking about yourself anymore. You start taking a broader perspective. And what do we care about? What do we care about? It's not necessarily what I care about, but it's what we care about together. Okay, so when you have that kind of buy-in, then you're able to dynamically find your way forward. You can be okay as a group without that, but you're not going to be adaptive. You're not going to be flexible. And so, with ASAM, with the student, one of the challenges was when she enters group work, trying to remember, why are we in this group? It's really just about being good enough and measuring up and not getting embarrassed, or showing that you're somebody, showing you're amazing, showing off. Okay. Why are we here? What are we trying to learn in this group? Why did we even take this class? And when you start to come back to that, and you see the faces, and so, this person is not just someone you show off to. This person is not just someone you're going to prove that you're somebody to, but this person becomes a person who's finding their way through lives too. And then you start to be able to take a broader perspective to what you might want to achieve as well. Okay, so again, of course, this will connect to the ACT skills too for the personal values. Okay, and then there are a few, several. So this is the first one, yeah, shared identity and purpose. But then this whole process of trying different things will also connect to the group level. Yeah, what does it mean to try different things and to learn and to flexibly respond as a group? So I'll just go through these quickly. When you go into the group, do all the people actually involved in different decisions have a say? Because the people involved, they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones who know the situation best. If we're going to find our way together, are these people able to be involved? What happens when the people, this happens in schools a lot. The people who are teaching the actual students have so many ideas about what a good education is. But who's coming up with the theories or the policies of how you're supposed to teach? Sometimes you have people who have never set foot in the classroom for the past 20 years, saying, okay, we're all supposed to do this. What the hell is that? Now, that might work in a bureaucratic sense, but it's not going to be adaptive. Because if we're going to find our way together, I have to know who has their eyes on the situation. I have to know who have their feet on the ground. Okay, number 4, do we notice and care about the behavior of others? If we're going to find our way together, we're moving together, we're responding together. I'm trying to do this to support my friend, if this person is doing something completely different that's ruining all of my efforts to support this friend, I think that it's time to be gentle. This person thinks tough love is what's needed, and you're just kind of jamming in, and it's not gonna work. So in a sense, you have to be interested in the behavior of other people. But again, there are internal blocks for that. So sometimes, people are actually afraid of looking at each other because they don't want to be judged and they don't want to judge each other. So they just, okay, just gonna do my own thing. But again, that means you're not going to be able to coordinate behavior with each other. And then, are we able to support each other's behavior? So, you choose behavior, you do behavior, you notice each other. And then when you notice the behavior, are you able to support the behavior of other people? When someone does something that's actually helping your friend, are you able to say, "But thanks for doing that, man. I think that was helpful." Are you able to support that? Because that's tiring for that person too. Or is it just, oh, he did something, I'm just not going to say anything? Or if someone's doing something, tough love, and the guy's kind of crying in the corner, are you actually able to say, "Hey, man, stop fucking doing that"? You know what I mean? And it's not out of judgment, but we're moving together. We're trying to find our way together. And that means we care about each other's behavior. That means behavioral shaping, as we call it in behaviorism, is something that you do together. Something that you do together. And in the whole process of finding your way together as a group, are you able to value each member? So if we're all going to put our power behind moving together and finding our way as a group, are you able to actually value your individual members? And are you able to value their differences? Because the differences are what allow us to have different possible responses to unforeseen circumstances. In evolution, they call this variability. If you don't have variability, you can't have selection and retention, as the evolutionary theory. Because we have different ways of trying to help a person, that means if one way doesn't work, we can try other ways. But sometimes in groups, we insist on being all the same, which is actually what kills your ability to respond to changing scenarios. Okay, so interesting, right? Interesting. Just like the individual has to find their way in reality, as groups, we're also trying to find our way in reality. So in a sense, education, that's a challenge too. I'm not teaching you to go out in the world and be a lone wolf. I'm teaching you to go out in the world as a Homo sapiens with other human beings. And am I able to prepare you for that? And interesting though, it's not just about this group, You might have this group cooperating to make life living hell for every other group. You have a problem. And so they talk about this as in terms of a multi-level cascade, yeah? So Dewey would say, how full and free is the interplay with other forms of association? And so this is the MLS theory, right? Just as group flourishing can only occur if members cooperate in a shared situation, groups of groups, So like, for example, you have one group doing group work, one group doing group work, one group doing group work. But the class works, not just because the groups can cooperate within themselves, but because they can cooperate with each other. And in a sense, that's how democracy works too. No one sees the whole Philippines. No one sees the whole Japan. But do the little pockets that actually take care of each other get to connect and take care and respond cooperatively with other pockets? And so this is a CDP 7 and 8, so it's group influence coerced by larger groups, So just like the individual has to, have their own say as they find their way forward, is the group allowed to have a say? So you can have a group of teachers and they come up with all these ideas, but then administration tells them you're not doing that. And so how are they going to flexibly find their way together? In the same way, if you have a group and all they care about is themselves and they don't respond to other people, you also have a problem. So that's a CDPA. How is this group able to be a cooperative and contributing member to outside groups? Okay, so basically this whole image of pragmatism is about finding your way through life flexibly, not only doing that as an individual, but doing that as a group. Okay? And so in a sense, a pro-social or a CBS take on collaborative learning, it's not just let's put you in groups to build these various skills, pro-social behavior, this and that, but looking at through functional analysis, where is this group struggling as it tries to find its way together? And each individual, where are they struggling with their own personal challenges as they try to do that together? And the interesting thing is, I teach this very therapy-ish self-compassion class. Compared to my self-compassion class, my pro-social class had 3 times more students spontaneously requesting counseling after. After my classes, people realize they have problems and like, sir, I think I need help. Self-compassion, a lot of people come up to me. A whole lot more came up after pro-social. And the funny thing is, I wasn't talking about therapy at all. And that's a funny thing, in a sense, nothing brings out issues like cooperative situations. Nobody listens to me, or everyone forces me to bear all the burden myself, or even if I try things, people don't appreciate me. All of this shit. This comes out when you try to cooperate with people. I mean, I think we're pretty cooperative in class and in the Ateneo, but like sometimes, teachers can struggle to collaborate with each other. But part of that is, in a sense, it's hard to work with other people. It's easier to deal with shit on your own. Of course, it severely restricts your power, but it's hard to cooperate. It's hard to collaborate. And so, again, it's not about airtight design of collaborative learning, having this perfect group work planned out, but it's knowing that group work necessarily brings out group struggles, personal struggles. And in a sense, what are you really trying to teach? Are you trying to teach people to have perfect group work? Or are you trying to teach them to be able to flexibly respond even when group work isn't perfect? Because that's the kind of relationships they're going to have in real life. That's the kind of marriages they're going to have. That's the kind of families they're going to have. That's the kind of work relationships they're going to have. And so in a sense, that's the pedagogy of interruption, this time on the group scale. Okay, and then again, supplementing learning theory with functional analysis of groups. Not just in general, this is what the group should be, but learning how to look at a group and learning to teach students to look at their own groups and see, hey, where are we going wrong? And again, this whole pragmatic idea of being flexible, not modeling stiffness, but modeling flexibility. All right, so we're entering the third part of my talk, the third point. And this one, maybe I'll go through this a little bit quicker. Maybe this is a bit more distant for people. But just in case you decide to get really serious, if you like learning and taking things in, it might hit a point someday that you want to be part of how we think about learning and taking things in. So it's fun to learn, but when you get to thinking about, I want to change the way other people learn, this is where theory and science and academia start to become very important. So, CBS is a hard science. They have more than 1,000 RCTs for ACT. They do prediction and influence. They have laboratory experiments and all these different kinds of research. But unlike a lot of approaches in cognitive behavioral therapy, even in psychoanalysis, but there's actually a lot of similarity to psychoanalysis in many ways. Anyway, unlike a lot of DSM-style approaches, they are very much against pathologizing and separating problem students. This is not psychology for the problem student, because human beings suffer. This Hayes, the founder of ACT, human suffering predominantly emerges from normal psychological processes. It's not that there's something wrong with you. If you're suffering, the problem is you're a human being. Particularly those involving our ability to think. All right, so that's one, not pathologizing and knowing this CBS stuff, it's not for the dropouts, it's for everybody. Second, instead of having formist generalization, you just classify, who's problematic, who isn't, are you GAD, are you major depression, are you what? You have functional analysis, what's working for this person and what isn't. This is a very strong remark. Classification approaches that are oriented toward differences between persons, statistically classifying disorders, for example, are unable to fully understand the source of important changes within the individual. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how depressed you are compared to everybody else. What matters is how are you going to get more flexible in your relationship to yourself slowly every single day. Okay, so it's very important to see that when we put education and psychology together, it can't just be, oh, okay, the therapist said this, oh, let's do it in education. Japan went through that for a while, and that was a very bad idea. So in a sense, there has to be a shift. It's not about diagnosing, not about throwing medicine at people, but suddenly as teachers, we have to have a different way of looking at psychology that is specific to the demands of education. On this one, maybe I'll go through this just a little bit quickly, but one of the things that's coming up, people are fighting about this because it's so hard, is the problem of individualism. Who thinks? Who is the one who's doing the thinking? Who is the one who's getting stuck? Even when you talk about a group, who's the one who's getting stuck? the most common way of thinking about it is that it's the individual who gets stuck, right? Question, where did you learn how to get stuck? Where did you learn that no matter what you do, no one's going to appreciate it? Where did you learn that no matter how hard you try, you're just never going to be good enough? When did you learn that if you don't do what other people expect, that you're not going to be loved? You didn't come up with those on your own. So in a sense, what is the thinking being? I started out as an existentialist, so this was a very, very hard thing for me to grasp. I started out with existence, the irreducible singularity of the self. But at the same time, as this unique being with my most unique struggles that threaten my ability to stay alive sometimes, the issue is relational. The relations that I carry deep within my bones that I might not even tell anyone. And so what we're finding in pro-social research is actually a shift in how we think about people. Thinking is not a private process. Thinking, even when it's inside your head, is a social process. Being a self is not a private process. Selfhood is only something that happens relationally. That means the whole structure of how we do psychology, of how we measure, of how we look at traits, of how we look at personality, of how we look at identity is going to have to shift. And this is something that George Herbert Mead was talking about with this idea of interactionism. I'm not going to go into it, but the important thing is that suddenly psychology opens up into things like sociology, economics, political science. So this is not, okay, let's just do interdisciplinarity, let's just throw it all together, but it's an interdisciplinarity that is necessary. Because looking at the individual will make you miss so many of the real problems that are actually going on. And which brings me to the second theme of our series of workshops. The past 2 days, we were talking about from well-being to empowerment in education. Empowerment. Can we really separate psychological interventions from social change? One of the biggest annoyances, it's not annoyance, that's not the right word. The real word is enrage, getting enraged by, is when we counsel people and we work so hard to get them to be okay again, and they finally come back to school only to get messed up. I tell people that they're fine the way they are and they can start with where they are. I tell people that failure is a situation where they can learn. And when they finally get that and they go back to school, what does the school tell them? And so in a sense, one of the problems in Japan, and I'm furious about this, is they're basically, oh, so many mental health problems, we should have more therapists. No, you should stop breaking kids. That's what. And so in a sense, we have to think about, with psychology, the problem of social change. And at the same time, when we try to think about social change, like we try to build democratic society, do people have the courage to be democratic citizens? Do people have the courage? Do they have the responsibility for that? Do they have the ability to perspective take broader than themselves, broader than their class interests, to think about the whole? So again, you can't have social change without individual change. And so in a sense, when we talk about this coming together, when we talk about this interdisciplinarity, it's not that sloganeering sort of, let's be interdisciplinary. We need to get beyond the barriers between these departments because the human condition requires it. We can't find our way together if individuals lack the agency to find their own way, and individuals can't find their own way in life if they live in a society that has no intention for them to find their way together. I left myself 5 minutes for a really important major point. I'll be quick about this. Science and spirituality. Paul Standish, in my heart, the #1 philosopher of education in the world right now. And when I gave a similar talk about this, he told me, yeah, it's great, but pragmatism is always about controlling things, fixing things, making things work out. But is that missing transcendence? Isn't that missing letting go? I remember Dr. Bazo would always say Gelassenheit. There's no Gelassenheit in pragmatism. And I was stumped. I was like, yeah, I think so. Shit, you know. I was thinking about it. And, pragmatism is about how to find our way in life. Behavioral science is about how to predict and control. It stinks of calculating thinking. And that's true. But I was going back, I was reading James, and I was thinking, compared to absolute views of truth, if you don't think of it in a glib way, what was he trying to do there? He was actually arguing for intellectual humility. He was trying to argue, don't get caught up in the arrogance of noble thoughts. It's supposed to be this way. Let go of that and be willing to face the dirt of how things actually are. So I was interested that maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something there that's pointing beyond just fixing things. And also Mori Akira. Mori Akira was also similarly, he's a Japanese pragmatist. He was struggling with pragmatism too. And he was saying, how do we think about the problem of death? We want to live well. Yes, we want to live well. Yes, live well. But are you going to die well? And the interesting thing is, it's not just I'm going to die. The thing is, my students are going to die too. I've lost students already, and it kills me. I think that's not the order of things. I'm older than these kids. I'm supposed to die first. But they're going to die too. And I'm responsible to them to help them live their lives well. Can I be responsible to help them die their deaths well? And the interesting thing here that I found as I was struggling with this question is something Stephen Hayes said. He said, and this is going to sound a little bit abstract, but bear with me, self as context or perspective taking. The psychological literature contains numerous terms and concepts that allude to this aspect of self. A transcendent sense of self, the observing self, noticing self, continuity of consciousness, pure awareness. Spiritual and religious traditions similarly cite a variety of relevant terms: spirituality, a no-thing self, big mind, wise mind, and so on. Basically, you're saying, like, remember we talked about sticky thoughts and you can't change your thinking, you can't change your self-criticism. But what do? You notice, hey, there's my mind going on again, saying I'm crap, saying I'm not good enough. But what's happening there? What's happening there is you've taken a step back to notice your thinking. Or here I am trying to be a good kid again, trying to be a good student again, trying to be a lovable son again. What are you doing? You're not the lovable son anymore. You're not the good student anymore. You're able to step back and look at it, right? Who's looking? The part of you that notices your thoughts is not a thought. That part of you that notices your different selves is not a self. The part of you that notices things is not a thing. And so what Stephen Hayes was saying was the very idea of spirituality, the very idea of going beyond the stuff, not in an absolute way, not in a, well, it could connect to that idea, but not necessarily so. This ability to step back from it. Sometimes the very stepping back that allows you to flexibly change your response to your thoughts, to your kind of self. That very thing is what connects to the idea of spirituality. So in a sense, when we think about pragmatism, it looks like it's trying to fix things. But what's behind the flexibility that lets you fix things? Is that just a fixing? If all there was doing, you would never be able to change what you do. And so, I remember Andrew saw you and Doc Manny used to teach us a Lao Tzu, and Wu Wei, non-doing. But in a sense, behind all flexible doing is a willingness to stop. And so I wonder, perhaps, well, I talked about today science, pragmatism, functional analysis, learning to move effectively forward. But when we talk about where that flexibility comes from, then maybe we start to see a synergy between pragmatic learning design and all of this with things like spiritual openness, mindfulness, art. You're not trying to do anything with it, you're just taking it in. How does that taking in let flexibility happen? Literature, poetry, theology. And that's my time. Okay, so I'm not going to read this. This is just my conclusion. These are the three things that I was talking about. Basically, pragmatism, finding our way forward, not just individually, but in groups. And what does it mean to help people that way? What does it mean to help yourself that way? And how that needs, this various functional tools of CBS, of contextual behavioral science, but also how that changes the very way we think about science, individuality, even spirituality. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you very much. And I open the floor to questions. I look forward to hearing your questions. It always helps me to be more flexible and make my thinking more real. So if you have questions, please come to the mic.
Yeah, so we only have 10 minutes left. So we're just gonna, I know that some of you have really very good questions, but we'll do it this way. We'll accommodate three questions, but I'd like you to raise your questions in the mic, and then Dr. Sevilla will respond to them in one blow. Yeah. So anyone who'd like to take okay, still have 10 minutes.
Hello po. Thank you po for the nice talk. Sorry, I have a bad voice today. I think the points raised are very interesting, especially because I know a lot of us here are undergrad students and a few master students, and Siyempre, we can all like relate to the feeling of being in a class where we feel like we're just kind of told to memorize things, or we feel like we're in a class that doesn't really align with what we're trying, our aims, our values. And I feel like this talk was very important. Well, helped us realize that there are these other approaches to education. And Siyempre, for professors, it also helped them take on more flexible stances. But I guess I'm just curious from a student perspective, aside from like taking counseling or therapy or doing group work to help change some bad habits we form because of the way education is typically done, how can we, like we talked about in the latter half, how that even if you have individual change, it doesn't help if the general social structures don't really change either. So how can we, like as students, for example, if we're in a class and we feel that the way it's being done isn't very productive for us, or we feel that there's a lack of flexibility from a professor, for example, instead of just from the perspective of us being a professor and trying to administer group work in the class, how can we include the professor or the teacher or the administrator as a part of our group in a way in shaping the class?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Two more questions, maybe? I'm taking notes, okay, so I can answer your stuff.
So good afternoon, Doc. We have questions here from Chloe or Nina. The question is, what implications do formist generalizations have for designing effective interventions and treatments within the framework of CX?
Okay.
And I think this one is an additional from her as well. How can technology be used to enhance active learning experience and provide opportunities for hands-on learning?
Okay. Do you have another question from the floor? Or are you signing up for that? No? Maybe I'll take one more question. Anyone?
Hello, so thank you so much for your very insightful talk. I'm taking a minor in education here that and so the talk was very insightful for me. So I guess my main question is knowing the Philippine education right now is very standardized and it's very hard to I'm trying to envision, pragmatism here instituted in the Philippines, especially in public schools or in private schools. So I guess do you think I'm asking from your perspective, do you think there's room for this pragmatist education, especially in the context of the Philippines where it's really hard to get past all the previous philosophies, previous thinking of education in the Philippines.
Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, thank you for your questions. I'll start with the one online from Orlina about formism. So again, formism is important, right? Formism is important because formism tells us the general traits. It tells us the big picture. When I prepare for a class, I need to know in general what is going to work. And these generalities are very, very helpful. In general, I know Japanese students don't like jokes in class because it's awkward to have to laugh. You might get the timing wrong. In general, Japanese students are going to have much lower self-esteem and much lower self-disclosure. I need to know those things. If I don't know the generalities, I can make a ridiculously stupid lesson plan and set myself up for falling flat on my face. So you need the generalities. In general, who is at risk for suicide? In general, if you have a DSM diagnosis of general anxiety disorder, what situations are going to be challenging for you? If you're on the autism spectrum, what are the challenges that are potentially going to come up in group work when it comes to perspective taking, right? We need to know these things. This is very important. But going to what the two of you talked about. So let's say I have all of these. Very important thing I think to stress, and this is something that I don't know if you're going to ever become a teacher, but if you become a teacher, there's a very important thing to know. One of the things that really killed me as a teacher is I forgot that teachers get to be human too. One of the things about teachers is teachers are terrified. I mean, I've been teaching for quite a while. I remember talking to Eddie Boy Calasans about this, and he says, I'm scared before the start of every semester too. And if that fear goes away, there's something wrong with me as a teacher. I'm terrified. And so a lot of times when we have this nice plan that we came up with based on generalizations, the reason why we cling to that is because we're afraid. So it's a it's a psychological flexibility issue as well. Now, as students, what are you gonna do when your teacher is stuck in a very inflexible situation? Now, one is as a student, as I was telling you a while ago, you have a lot of power because how you take things up is up to you. I can come up with brilliant examples, but I'm old. I don't know your Gen Z stuff. I kind of do, but not really. You know what I mean? So it's gonna be up to you. I'm gonna try to bridge it, but that's gonna be on you. So I can try, but if you don't try, I'm actually doomed. So if I don't try, but you try, we're not completely doomed. That's a nice thing about individual social being interrelated. You can push it from either side. You can push it from either side. And you can start. And the thing is, again, your teachers are human. If me as a teacher, I see that every time I teach, no one cares, no one's trying to find their way, no one's really thinking about things, I start getting more formist and I just stick to generalities. But if I see interested people, if people are asking me questions, if people are saying, hey, sir, you talked about Aquinas, and I was thinking during my retreat about this, and when that happens, then suddenly I start connecting things. We are vulnerable to you too as teachers. So in a sense, of course, there's a lot of responsibility on us as teachers. So for those of you who are teachers, we got to work on our stuff too. But at the same time, students, you're not powerless. And so that's what I want to point out. And just a quick point about technology. Technology can really go either way. Like I really found in Japan, it's easier for them to self-disclose online because no one can see their faces. And so it can be helpful. You can use it as an opportunity. But again, one of the biggest risks, especially when it comes to collaborative stuff, is, and they're finding this in neuroscience, the human ability to perspective take is intrinsically tied to our ability to see faces. There's actually something about why Levinas says the phenomenology of the face. when you see the face of another in pain, you cannot help but feel it too. So in a sense, perspective taking and the ability to flexibly adapt as groups requires the ability to see each other's faces, which is why they're talking about democracy now, not as one big thing, but how do we create it through polycentric governance between smaller groups of people who can see each other's faces. So if you want to look that up, look it up, polycentric governance, Ostrom. But basically, if we're going to use technology, we have to remember that while we might hear voices, if we don't see faces, that tactile sense that allows you to perspective take to the other, we have a real threat to democracy and a real threat to human relationships. Okay, so that is time. Thank you everyone for your questions. I think we're going to end.